Hey guys, and welcome back for another episode of the Butterfly Effect podcast. I'm Jack and I'm here with Liam.
Hello.
And in today's episode, we are analysing The Walking Dead 400 Days DLC. Okay, so before we get into the stories themselves, mate, I don't know if you wanted to touch on the first couple of shots that we see here to introduce this DLC. It's quite clear that the service station is like the main setting for like all of these stories, or at least the immediate area. And we have what I'm going to say is a quick comment. I really love the neon lights. For some reason I'm absolutely sold on neon lights, but just like when it comes up The Walking Dead and it has like the 400 days neon lighting, I absolutely love that. But we then have a notice board, don't we, with all these characters' names and faces on them, and I don't know, like as a way of getting the player to pick each character and just a way of displaying it, I particularly quite like that, mate. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this or...
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned the shot of the neon lights. I also love the shot of just the gas station where it's booming and then out of nowhere there's just zombies, even though it's the same shot. I really enjoyed that one. And yeah, you mentioned about like the intro and stuff. And to be honest, you could argue it did better than season 1, because with Lee and Clementine, you know, it was like one car crash and suddenly the zombies were everywhere, the apocalypse happened around. This one almost gives a more subtle kind of feel to when the zombies start breaking out. I really like the opening shot. Fun Easter egg as well. You've got Kenny, Catcher, and Duck, fueling up their car before, they leave, which I quite like. A lot, a season 1 Easter egg there. And yeah, the missing posters, it's interesting because you don't really sort of see that side of The Walking Dead, because this is early days where people go missing, maybe they get infected, they never come home, and this is where people still don't really know about the apocalypse and it's kind of breaking out. So yeah, it's super interesting, and I quite like the way that you pick the characters, you select the missing person picture, and obviously this game won't follow Lee and Clementine. This game will follow 5 random anthologies of characters we'll probably soon forget, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, mate, did you want to start with... we've got Vince down first, haven't we?
We have, yes. And it gets off to a quick start, doesn't it, Vince's chapter? We see him presumably kill someone, and then he's legging it, and you can hear police sirens. And I'll tell you what, before we go forward, just to let everyone know, I've only played 400 Days once. I do not remember what my choices were at all. It was that long ago, so I'm going to be playing it as if I'm making these choices now. And you get your first choice, not that it really matters, but you can either dispose of the gun in the bin or you can throw it up onto the rooftop. Now, I would have thrown it up onto the rooftop. I don't know if you want to comment, mate, on what you did.
It's exactly what I did. Not that it matters. They'll find it either way, but yeah, I threw it on the roof.
Yeah, I just thought, well, it makes sense. Like, the bin's the first place they're going to look. But
yeah,
of course, it then cuts, and you can see that Vince has been caught for his crimes. He's clearly on his way to prison. They've got the orange overalls on. And we're introduced to 2 other characters, Danny and Justin. And you know what? Just on like a writing, a comment on writing here, I really appreciate the back and forth between these 2 characters, Danny and Justin. They're clearly digging one another out, and they're really sort of talking about quite dark things. I think one of them is accused of being a rapist, and I think the other one is accused of stealing. Like, again, sort of like, very dark themes that the devs are willing to do here. And Vince, as you're sort of sat in the middle, aren't you? And you're sort of saying the odd thing here or there, to almost like facilitate this argument. But I mean, mate, what were you What were your overall thoughts about Danny and Justin in this chapter?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I noticed is that Justin's the same voice actor for Ben. They look a little similar as well, and you will see that a lot with 400 Days, that a lot of voices are recycled. For example, in Shel's story, Stephanie's voiced by the same lady as Carly. Leland from Bonnie's stories, voiced by the same guy as Andy St. John. And here, you know, being such an avid fan of The Walking Dead at the time, I was like, hey, it's Ben. But yeah, like really interesting back and forth. And I quite like the dynamic outside of the group as well. You know, you've got the two prison guards, you've got like the other two prisoners going back and forth fighting. And yeah, eventually the whole scene sort of just blows up, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it does. So you see two other prisoners get into a bit of an altercation, and one of them wraps his hands, and he's obviously got his hands in cuffs, around the other's neck and starts to kill him, I suppose. And the security are just so slow to act. They're just pointing a gun at him saying, stop, stop. And of course, like, I think it's Danny. He's like, we've got to help them, we've got to do something. And of course, the other one, you know, in typical Telltale fashion, they put you in the middle of two polarizing opinions. Justin, he's saying, no, what you doing? Just sort of sit it out, you know, and let it happen. But I'm pretty sure I sided with Danny. I was like, yeah, go on, like, help the guy. And before he does, he then sees the security blow the guy's brains out. You're thinking, well, at last. I mean, you could have just gone up to them and pulled them apart, but, you know, whatever, blow his brains out. But too late, because the other guy slumps down dead. And because we know how the apocalypse works now, it doesn't matter. So as soon as you die, everyone's infected, so he's going to come back. The security officer's life is marked, really. And of course, with the prisoners being in chains, it then adds to that extra drama, because they're then trapped in the back of this bus with a zombie and they're completely chained up. So really interesting premise. I don't know what it is about an anthology and how you have small select of characters in a very tight-knit environment that I absolutely love. But I was like really, really digging like this whole chapter, mate. So I suppose, did you want to comment on that particular bit, or did you want to move it forward?
Yeah, of course. I find it quite interesting that this is the chapter where you feel really confined, that you're literally in shackles on a prison bus, and you see the apocalypse happening out the window at one point, don't you? And you literally are stuck, and then it comes into sort of like the final choice. But yeah, no, like, quite interesting. I do think this chapter's very much helped from the writing and the characters around you and the situation. I think Vince is quite bleak, personally.
Yeah.
But you know, like, still quite a strong chapter. I mean, and it ends in like the big choice, doesn't it? With you know, the guard kind of goes on the gun, you shoot the zombie, but then all the zombies break onto the bus and you have to escape by the back. But to do it, you have to kind of break through the shackles. So you're gonna either have to shoot Danny or Justin's leg. I can't remember if you remember what you chose, mate, but did you shoot Justin or Danny's leg, and also why?
I shot Justin because I felt like Danny was the more empathetic character. I was thinking he's the one that I'd rather stick around with, given how he acted when the other prisoner was killing the other prisoner.
Yeah.
I was thinking, yeah, Justin's a little bit cold-hearted. I don't think I'd want to keep him around in the midst of apocalypse. But overall, I mean, it's obviously a very dark ending, a very solid chapter, in my opinion.
Yeah. I actually I shot Danny's leg. Two reasons. The first one being his accusation was, you know, potential sexual assault on a minor, and I was like, if that is true, I'm not having you with me. While the other guy just, you know, did some bad dealings on Wall Street, and I was like, okay, well, you know, I'd rather pick that. And the second reason is he was closer to the door. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, right, okay. I mean, did we want to move on to Wyatt next.
Yeah, let's move on to Wyatt.
Sweet. So the first thing I want to say is that I really do love how all of these stories are somewhat tied in with one another, because the first shot you get of Wyatt's chapter is the abandoned bus. I just thought that was a really nice touch, considering that we just played Vince's chapter. But of course, you're in a car, you're playing as Wyatt, and you're with his mate Eddie, and clearly something's gone down involving Eddie shooting someone. And it's quite, I mean, it's got a fairly action-packed start, really. You're in a car, you've got a gun, and you're clearly being chased by other people who are clearly mad about Eddie killing one of their own. They ultimately turn off the road and they sort of drive into these foggy woods, and they lose the people that were behind them. And I suppose the main crux of this episode really lies in once they hit something in the car, isn't it, mate? So the dilemma being, did they hit a walker or did they hit a human being?
I quite like this chapter, and I think it's strongly helped by the two characters, because if you think about it, Vince's chapter, Vince is quite bleak, but he's helped out by, a lot going on around him. Wyatt and Eddie are literally just in a car for half of it chatting, but I think they're not bleak. They're two really interesting characters, in the dialogue and writing. It's quite comedic, but they also have a bit of depth to them. We've clearly got two sort of best friends who have a bit of like a comedy sort of stoner kind of Pineapple Express almost dynamic to them, and I thought it was really refreshing. I really bought into Wyatt and Eddie, because you generally feel the fear from them when they're getting chased by Eddie, or when they've hit by who will later learn to be called Nate, and when they hit this guy on the road, and then they're like panicking. And it leads up to like the first big choice, which also interestingly was a trophy. You're a trophy person, Jack. Like a lot of the times, like season 1 was just complete this chapter, now complete this chapter. This was the first sort of trophies we had in Walking Dead history where it was like, now you've got to actually complete this or do a little side thing. Rock, paper, scissors. Do you remember if you won or lost your first time, mate?
Definitely lost. And I lost several times because, I was going back and I was doing this several times to get the 100%. But oh my God, I like this chapter, I really do. But it's probably why I remember it the most, because of this solid achievement. The amount of times I lost, and then you have to go and replay the whole thing again, the same dialogue, and it's just like, oh, kill me now. But
the choice is towards the end of the chapter, so if you fail and go back, you have to do everything again.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, obviously I lost, and coming back to the hitting something in the car, my impulse would be, obviously I'd be thinking, oh God, what have we hit? But then I'd be thinking, would a human being be wandering about in a foggy woods? I was thinking, it's surely got to be a walker. So to my surprise, when you actually approach the body and you see it's a cop, and you think, oh God, what are we going to do? We've got to, help this guy. You then do have a choice, don't you? And you can either leave the cop or you can help him. Now, I would have helped him, and if you do, it then prompts this sequence where you're dragging him back towards the car, which is, for a gameplay thing, I think was really cool, because in order to shoot the oncoming zombies, you had to drop him, turn around, deal with them, pick him back up, and drag him again, which I think was quite a nice moment. But yeah, just everything about this chapter, I don't know why, but it just gave off Stephen King vibes for me. I don't know why, because I don't think I've read a similar Stephen King short story before. But just the oppressive fog, there's the lights coming through the trees when you ultimately see them thugs or whoever that, pulls back up and goes after Eddie. You've got the choice and sort of the hitting with the car and things. There's actually so much going on here in these 15-20 minutes that it's so memorable for me, and I just really enjoyed it.
Yeah, the creepy van gives me serious Jeeper Creeper vibes as well. You know, with like the lights at the top of it, and you know, I haven't been, you know, scared from like a vehicle like that much actually, but it was quite eerie with this Nate guy chasing you. To be honest, mate, I didn't know which choices you picked there. I honestly thought I was the only one who lost rock paper scissors. I also lost it many times and had to go back countless times to get the trophy. And I honestly thought I was the only one, so it's really interesting that both of us have matched that. Because I think both of my brothers and at least 2 friends I've had have just completed it one rock paper scissors first time. And when I talk to them, they're like, "What? You can actually lose that?" They thought you automatically had to win, and like the game sets it. So I was just like, "Yeah," and like I think I did it on like my 6th try. I just had the worst luck. And what's interesting is I like the fact that there's 2 very different endings based off of whether you win or lose this match. So in our case, Jack, obviously we would have dragged this guy back, and then obviously you see that this Nate guy's come back, and then Eddie's ditched you. So kind of from a moral side, we're probably the better person because we're not the one who leaves. But I don't know, have you seen the gameplay and seen what happens if you win the rock paper scissors game?
I haven't, and that's an absolute news flash to me that it's this Nate guy that's chasing you. I didn't even know that. So,
Yeah, it's the same car. Like if you look at the flood or like the lights at the top of the van, it's Nate. So someone who's quite friendly in the Russell story is actually your nemesis. We'll kind of get a similar dynamic where you play as Shel and, you know, you're in this lovely group. But that group's the one that's chasing Bonnie, Leland and Dee in the other story. So yeah, there's a lot of really fascinating crossovers and kind of like Maleficent or the boys type actually being in the villain shoes and different perspectives. It's really fascinating.
I think, honestly, my appreciation for this has just gone up a notch then, because I knew they were interwoven, but I thought it was more based on location. But the fact that, like they were interweaving the characters in different ways as well, that's so good.
Yeah, more than you know to like the walkers that you see going around. They're also characters that have died previously, whether it's in another 400 Days episode or in season 1. The details are really nice actually. But yeah, like obviously, so you don't know about what happens if Wyatt wins the game. It's probably the better sort of story in terms of jump scare. Our one was certainly more eerie. This is more of a jump scary one. So while Eddie goes out there in the dark, kind of fading into the pitch black as he leaves, you're kind of just left to look around the car, and you kind of get a bit of an examining exercise. And I think you drop your keys, and you're looking around, and you know, you have to look at the headlights, look in the glove box, and then you finally find out how to turn the lights on. And when you do, that's when Nate's car's there, and it's on the other side of the road just looking at you. So it's quite a cool jump scare ending. And he gets out the car and he starts trying to pull you out, and there's like, you've got to do some quick time events, some button mashing to get away from Nate. And it ends up with you driving away. So in our ending, we left Eddie. In this ending, Eddie leaves you. So, you know, it's probably a bit of a morally more kind of like guilt kind of ending, I guess, because you've just ditched your best mate there. Fun fact as well, Eddie comes back in season 4. So yeah, that's another cool thing to note as well, mate.
Brilliant. And as far as the Eddie things go, again, I've only played season 4 once. I don't remember Eddie at all. Like, all I remember in season 4 is Clem and AJ and the kids that you're with at that house. So clearly I need to do a refresh of this series because I'm missing out on all these little Easter eggs and stuff. But sweet. I mean, next on my list, mate, I've got is Shel. So, I mean, did you want to do Shel or another character?
Yeah, I can do. Like, it's nice that it starts off with a bit of music again. You know, so we've got Becca playing the guitar. You know, we've only had this since Chuck, really, and it's just a nice dynamic. So, you know, you've got Shel and Becca, 2 sisters. Stephanie, who's Gothic Carly. So I was very interested. Simp Liam's back, ladies and gentlemen. We have Roman, who, you know, this bold guy in a leather jacket who will make another guest appearance as a dead body in season 2. Fun fact. Oh. And And to our surprise, we have the cancer group that are back from episode 4.
Yes.
Without Vernon. So you've got the old lady Joyce, you've got I can't remember his name, Afro-y guy, and Morgan Freeman's back, ladies and gentlemen. We've got Morgan Freeman in the building. To be honest, this episode, kind of interesting. You're in quite a big group, which is quite different to what we've previously seen here. You've got quite a weird dynamic where at this diner you almost have zombie pet guards outside. A lot of the main kind of gist of it is that you don't like the fact that your little sister's changing and becoming more heartless. Like, for example, Roman's trying to get her to do like the feeding the zombie guard duty. To be honest, this bit of the chapter I find completely dull, just walking around. Like, there's not too much to it. The real meat of the story comes from the choices that come along. Before I get into them, mate, do you have anything to comment on, like the setting, the characters, what you felt like when the cancer group came back?
Yeah, so I suppose the first thing I thought, when I heard Roman's voice, and then even when I was looking at the character model, I was thinking, that sounds like Andy St. John. But then you mentioned that could be Leland Bonnie's as well, and I was like, it sounds like it. Even like just that, if you look at like Roman's sort of like eyes and nose, I don't know, I was just thinking, yeah, that's like Andy St. John. And honestly, I've literally got it down on my notes here as I was watching it. There's a particular shot, and I looked in the background, I was like, oh my god, that looks like one of the cancer patients. And immediately after that, you then saw them talking about Bree and Vernon. I was like, oh, that's fantastic. Like, they've got the cancer patients back, like characters that were just background in season 1, and now we're actually getting to sort of hear their voices and see what they're about. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It is pretty dead until you get up to the first choice. So you have this blindfolded person, don't you? And he was caught trying to steal supplies, and you've got this debate really amongst your group where a couple of people are saying we need to kill him because we can't afford to let him go, because if people know where we are, they could overrun us and take our supplies and whatnot. Then there was people saying, no, we need to keep him alive, we don't want to become monsters, etc. So, mate, in this first instance, do you remember what you did?
Yeah, and it's so typical Telltale fashion where you'll get like 3 votes one way, 3 votes the other way. But wanting to kill this guy to not take any risks was the old lady and the Afro dude, and wanting to spare the guy was Morgan Freeman and Gothic Carly. So I think it's pretty simple who I picked, being the simp I am. And I spared the guy. I was like, at the end of the day, he's probably just a starving guy. We can't guarantee he's a part of a group. Maybe I'd think differently now that I'm older, but back then I was like, yeah, I'm sparing him. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'd have probably picked to spare him. But you know what I'd have done? I mean, I know this is like taking it too far, but if you were that paranoid about him going back to a group, why don't you just drive him out like 20, 30 miles away, drop him off and just leave him so that he doesn't know where he is, and then that eliminates like the possibility of him going back to a group. But
yeah, I'd follow him. I'd be like, okay, where's your group?
Yeah, yeah, it just starts inches behind him.
Yeah. LA Noire style.
Yeah. Of course, as we find out, being a nice guy doesn't pay off in this instance, because as Becca and Shel are playing cards, we learn about an attack that happened, presumably as a result of letting this guy go. Now, again, I've only played this once. I don't know what happens if you choose to bump this guy off. I'm assuming that an attack happens regardless, but it'd be really interesting to know otherwise.
The same happens, it's just regardless of whether Morgan Freeman's alive or not. So because we spared him, the group comes back and kills Morgan Freeman. So if I knew this, I would have shot the guy in the back of the head. No one touches Morgan Freeman.
Obviously, Roman comes along and he says, Shel, I need another word. And he then tells you that Stephanie has been caught stealing. And I was thinking to myself, clearly this is why you had the heart-to-heart with Stephanie at the start of the game. To position her as like your best bud, to make the choice even harder when it comes to, what to do with her. You have a moment where you have to tell him, I'll go back to Becca and explain what's going on. And we're left with a choice, aren't we? So there's, I believe you're looking down at a table and there's keys and then there's a gun. The keys obviously signifying, let's just take the RV and get out of here. I don't want us to become monsters. And the alternative being that, you grab the gun and presumably go and kill her. But as a quick comment before we get to that choice, I've just got to say that Shel's sister Becca, she's more savage than my version of Lee. I've just got some quotes here that I'm going to say. She's like, oh, let's just get on with it when referring to killing Stephanie. Then she's like, oh yeah, the gun's over there. Like, she couldn't wait. And I was thinking, God, girl, like this upbringing that she's had, like, Jesus, like you're so heartless. But yeah, I mean, coming back to the choice, mate, what did you do?
Now, I'm pretty sure I took the keys and drove away. I was like, I don't want to be part of this group. Like, you've got Roman, who, bit of a tosspot. Yeah, I don't know, I just wasn't for it. Like, realistically, if I had the choice, I wouldn't do either of those things. I would get the gun, I would point it at Roman, I'd be like, let Stephanie go. She comes in the RV with me, we kick Becca out, and then me and Stephanie drive off into the sunset.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But that wasn't an option, annoyingly.
No, it's like Carly's successor.
Yeah, Carly's reincarnated alternative sister. I couldn't get with her.
God, it's ticking boxes for you, I can tell.
It is. But yeah, how about you? What did you pick, keys or gun?
I mean, I would have picked the keys because I was thinking it's clearly impacting my sister big time. She has been round Roman too long, and yeah, we need to get her out of that and to sort of just get out of this situation, to find some humanity again and not rely on other people. So yeah, I mean, that concludes Shel's chapter. Well, let's move on to Bonnie, shall we? Which, speaking for me personally, I think is the weakest of the stories. I like all of the stories in this 400 days. I would say for me, this is the weakest. So you're introduced to Bonnie and Leland, and it's quite clear from their dialogue that Bonnie is recovering from some sort of addiction. And then sort of a slight spanner is thrown in the works because you think that they're a couple, but then Leland's wife Dee comes over and you're thinking, oh, hang on, that there's obviously a bit of a secret affair going on here. And it does seem like that Dee catches on to this very quickly because she starts referring to Bonnie as Leland's girlfriend. There's a couple of digs here and there on the walk away. But then, of course, you hear gunshots and you can see flashlights, and it prompts this segment where you have to start running, and then Bonnie gets shot in the shoulder, I think. Why is it always the shoulder, like with Mark in season 1? And then, yeah, I mean, she falls down a hill, but I'm noticing that I'm like rapidly getting through this chapter. So, like, mate, have you got any comments for like these early scenes?
Yeah, like obviously it starts off with a would you rather. Would you rather have a snake for a tongue or lobster claws for hands, Jack?
Oh, of course, yeah. I'm going to say a snake for a tongue.
Yeah, you got the snake for a tongue ending then. Oh, that's cool. But yeah, no, like you said, yeah, it's a pretty weak chapter. It's a little upsetting because I quite like Bonnie as a character, like she's the one that will ultimately get the most out of the 5. The whole junkie backstory, quite fascinating. I quite like her southern accent. So like I thought maybe Bonnie, the character, was done a little dirty here. It's definitely cool that we get to see a lot more of her. But yeah, weak story. I mean, at the end of the day, what is it? You're playing a bit of Would You Rather. There's a chase through a forest, and then it leads to this end choice. But yeah, bringing back to what I mentioned, though, mate. Did you not know then that the group chasing you, it was the flashlights in the cornfield? It's a Shel's group with especially Roman and Stephanie. Yeah.
Not at all. And like I say, the more I'm hearing this now, the more my appreciation for 400 Days is going up, because it is like all of the stories are interlinked, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, I mean, it adds a whole dynamic to like the fact that sometimes you're playing as the villain in someone else's story, if you get me.
Yeah,
like it's really well done from the devs. But,
it's interesting as well, because in Shel's chapter they'll talk about a missing flashlight from the cornfield chase, and they're obviously referring to when they were after Bonnie's group. So it's quite interesting, and there are a few little breadcrumbs to kind of make you put two and two together there. But yeah, and obviously we only see the silhouettes. I quite like the cornfield scene as well. It's probably the strongest bit, where you're weaving through. You have to dodge like the bodies. Quite fascinating. I quite like it. It leads to this final choice where where we find out. Well, no, it's not really a choice. You have to do it. Where Silhouette is walking in this little bit of clearing, and you welly this person in the face. Lo and behold, it's D, and you've just like put a weapon between her eyes, like you've just like dented her skull in. I thought this was stupid, because I mean, on one hand, why is D, who's supposed to be sneaking because there's a group out there with flashlights, why is she just casually walking? And why is Bonnie just being so aggressive that she's just gone and wellied this person in the face? I don't know if you thought the same, mate.
It is a bit OTT, a bit manufactured, isn't it? But I don't know, like it added a nice dynamic moving forward, especially up when Leland comes along, because you have choices, don't you? You can straight up lie to him and be like, I didn't do it, even though you're sat there with a crowbar in your hand. Yeah, I didn't do it. But and it's obviously, I mean, again, I don't know what I picked here. I think moving forward I would have told the truth. I certainly wouldn't have lied to him, which is all the while, like, because obviously the gameplay that I was watching to refresh on this, I find it staggering that he's then like, D, and then he just runs off with you. Like he got over her quick, sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't know if it's based off of the dialogue or if you're honest or you lie, but I was honest, and he didn't come with me. Like the other group are coming, and then Leland's like, "Nah, I want to stay here." And obviously, like Leland gets shot for me, or like there's a gunshot behind you. So it turns out Shel's group are a lot more bloodthirsty than we thought, because they just shot Leland and D, or just shot Leland like out of nowhere. But yeah, so I had quite a sad ending for Bonnie there. But yeah, it's just a very short, kind of underwhelming chapter, really.
Yeah, that's so strange, because like I say, the one that I watched, it's obviously very specific dialogue, because the person I watched, I don't think they lied, and yet he ran off with her. Okay. But no, very weird. Alright, well, we've come to our final story, which is Russell. And, he's walking along a road, isn't he? It's like Little Hope all over again. And it's just slated Little Hope, for fuck's sake. And of course, I mean, the first choice you get is whether you hide or stand your ground. I do remember this one. I definitely hid, because one of the brilliant little Easter eggs that you have here is that you see Carly's dead body. Well, maybe for me it's a great Easter egg, maybe not for you, mate. It's just such a great, again, such a nice little reference to season 1.
Yeah, because for me, I stood my ground, because I was like, well, the guy's clearly seen me. I need to act tall and tough here for this guy. But then, see, yeah, I never knew, and my brother had to prompt me, like, "Oh, did you see the cool Easter egg?" I'm like, "What Easter egg?" He's like, "Yeah, like, yeah, honestly, just play it again, but pick hide, you'll see." And I did. I was like, "Oh no, my girl, my girl."
PTSD. Of course, I mean, to cut a long story short, you can either get in the truck or get in the truck, because even if you don't choose to, he drives off, and then conveniently a horde of zombies comes out, and then he just reverses and picks you up anyway. But yeah, I suppose this section, I don't know, like, weak for me. It's really trying to give Russell a backstory, and I don't know if it's just like the performance, but I just really wasn't buying into Russell as a character. Nate was clearly a dick, like from the get-go. That was, quite obvious.
Completely agree. Because like Russell, very bleak. There's not much going on there. They talk about this backstory, and I find it a bit again like Vince and Shel. The characters around them are the fascinating ones that make the story. Because at least with Nate, there's a bit of depth there. He's quite a quirky character where his morals are kind of wrong, but at least there's a little bit of comedy relief. And clearly, like, we know there's a bad side there, because this was the guy in the car that was after Wyatt. So, yeah, Russell bleak, but helped by his partner, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's a section, isn't there, where he pulls up and he wants you to answer him, like, how hot was this girl? Was she a 10 out of 10? He's letting like this zombie attack you unless you give him an answer. That just sort of gives you an insight into his character. And now that you've told me that he's the one that was chasing Wyatt and Eddie earlier on, I was thinking, actually, yeah, that does make quite a lot of sense. But I suppose the main part of this chapter is when you pull up at the gas station and you're having a bit of a chit chat, and then you start getting shot at. And I suppose this was the point where I was thinking, again, could there be a nice link here? Are we going to see Shel, or are we going to see, because we've obviously played the Shel chapter and they're based at the gas station. But after a couple of sequences where you cover one another, you fire some shots and run around some cars and trucks, you get to the back of the gas station and sneak in. And speaking for like, as like how the old man, you go in and the old man's still looking out the front. I'm sat there thinking, mate, like, you've seen these people, you've been shooting at us, we're clearly flanking you. There's only one way that we're going to be coming in. Like, why are you still looking out the front? It's obvious that we're going to be coming up behind you. But anyway, enough nitpicking. You end up sneaking up behind him, or not. You can actually go loud as well and confront the two old people. So, I mean, mate, any comments on this section?
Nah, I think you summed it up perfectly. The flank thing's kind of dumb. Bit of a weak chapter. Like, I didn't really buy into Russell. His dynamic with Nate's really weird. I thought it really strange how this old man is talking about, oh, you're clearly the masked man who's attacked us before. Because I don't even think this is a crossover thing to another group. I think this is just kind of maybe a bit of backstory they tried to develop that didn't really land for me.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, like, yeah, does Nate have a bit of a bad past, which I kind of sussed already. So yeah, like, I mean, it really leads to this choice: do you stay with Nate, or do you leave him? Because at the end of the day, he's heart set on killing this old couple, which is questionable itself. And I just was like, yeah, well, I don't want to stay with him, so I just straight up left.
Yeah.
I mean, how about you?
No, exact same, mate. Like I say, yeah, it hit a bit of a note, really, didn't it? I know that, like, say, like Wyatt's chapter, you get abandoned or you ultimately abandon him, but because the chapter was so strong in other ways, I could almost accept that being an ending. In this one, it felt like it was always going to be inevitable, and the whole backstory thing, I don't know, in that time period that I played this chapter, I didn't buy into it all that much, so I was just like, okay, that wraps that up.
Yeah, interesting.
But yeah, I mean, we then have like this little epilogue, really, don't we, where We're playing as a woman called Tavia, and she's clearly on the hunt looking for some people to build a community elsewhere, like Survivors Unite, which is obviously a nice little nod for what happens in season 2. And to cut a long story short, she manages to find the group of 5 that you've been playing as in each of these little chapters, and she asks them a question: do you want to come with me or not? Now, for me, one of the few things that I do remember, because the playthrough I watched, everyone went with her. I'm convinced that in my playthrough, only 2 or 3 people went with her. I think one of them being Bonnie, one of them being Wyatt, and maybe someone else, or it might have just been them 2. I can't quite remember. But yeah, mate, I mean, tell us how it played out for yourself.
Yeah, I had 4. I specifically remember how mine ended. I had 4 out of 5 come with me. I don't quite understand what endings you need to do. I think Bonnie's automatic, like she has to go with Tavia, but I know for a fact that I had Bonnie, Vince, Shel, and Wyatt, and I know that Russell stayed behind, so I'd never convinced him. I think a lot of it has to do with the dialogue you pick as Tavia at the end. So yeah, Russell wasn't in my season 2. Not that it matters, because it would have just been one cutscene. But yeah, very different.
Of course, and I mean, that signals the end of 400 days. Overall thoughts, mate, in comparison to season 1? What was it like revisiting?
Yeah, interesting. A few bullet points to say. I thought it was super interesting to steer away from Lee and Clementine. Certainly showed that you don't need those 2 to make a good Walking Dead style game. You mentioned it to me before the episode, you're a really big fan of anthology type things, so it was really refreshing to see this. It was quite a bold move by Telltale, but it's one that I would argue, yeah, paid off. Certainly flat in certain areas, especially since we only see the characters for 15 minutes each. So you don't really get to explore them. There's a lack of depth. A lot of the sequences end up having bleak characters, and ultimately, the choices don't matter. How about yourself?
I found it really enjoyable, actually, going back through these. As you've said already, I'm a big fan of anthologies, and I really don't mind the fact, like that's one of the great things of an anthology for me, is that that within this specific time period, you're gonna get a story, you're gonna be in, you're gonna be out, and then you're gonna know everything. You ain't gotta wait till next time. You ain't gotta hang around. And for what they tried and set out to do, I think on the whole, there's a couple of moments here and there that were weak for me in this episode, but I think they did really well. I think, considering you can't really have a lot of character depth, I think most of the characters come across pretty well. The stories themselves, and I think we'll do this when we do like the episode rankings, but I'd say the ones that were my favourite were the ones that were not similar to season 1. Things that happened, that were sort of very different and sort of moved away from what we got used to from in that season. So yeah, it was really good to revisit it. And yeah.
One thing I really liked as well is I just love the fact that firstly there's trophies in it which you can obtain without having to just complete a chapter. This was the first time this happened for Telltale Walking Dead, and I loved that, because especially I failed getting both on my first try and I had to replay the games, certainly in Wyatt's case, 6 times to do it. But I quite like that. It made me feel rewarded actually for once for getting a Telltale trophy rather than just having completed it. And the second thing I was going to mention is I love that it's littered with Easter eggs. The fact that the old woman in the diner, for example, that Russell comes across and Nate kills, is the zombie pet outside killing the puppy in Shel's story.
Yes, yeah.
The fact that Shel's group are the ones chasing Bonnie in the cornfield. The fact that the prison driver who ditches Vince's group is the other guard on the post in Shel's story. everyone is just littered with Easter eggs, and it's so enjoyable because you can just literally count dozens and dozens in each one. Even just from blood splatters on like the diner window, which clearly Nate killed the old couple, and then they're in the diner to this day in Shel's story. So yeah, just very interesting, such a treat, and it really rewards people who look between the lines and really dig deep.
Yeah, and I mean, you know what? I like the fact that you can play it in any order. But I mean, we were saying before, weren't we? I do kind of wish that I played it in chronological order to sort of see if that would become more obvious in terms of how woven the stories were together. But even just recording this episode, my appreciation's gone up for it so much because of the way they achieved the stories linked and the various Easter eggs and stuff. So dare I say that I enjoyed covering this more than even a couple of episodes in season 1, mate. So we have a controversial bombshell to end on.
Yeah, now honestly guys, thank you very much for listening to this podcast about 400 Days. Let us know if you enjoyed revisiting it as well. We'd like you to tell us which one your favourite episodes were. Was it Shel? Was it Russell? Was it Vince? Maybe Bonnie or Wyatt?
Fantastic. All right then, until next time, guys, we will love you and leave you.
All right, guys, see you in the next one. Take care.